Chapter 1: The Fateful Elevator. Raindrops trickled down the glass windows of the hotel, reflecting the shimmering lights of Venice at night. Elena Rossi hurried into the lobby of Palazzo Veneziano, her umbrella dripping water onto the cold marble floor. She quickly smoothed down her dark brown hair, which had been tousled by the wind, and glanced at her phone to check the time. She was running late. Elena sighed, adjusting her navy blue blazer over her pencil skirt, trying to regain her professional composure. She had spent an entire week arranging this interview, an incredibly rare opportunity to meet Adrian Sinclair, the enigmatic CEO of Sinclair Capital, the largest financial investment firm in Europe. What made this so extraordinary was that no media outlet had ever secured a direct interview with Adrian Sinclair. The man was a mystery, a ghost in the financial world, so powerful that a single decision from him could bring down an entire corporation. Elena knew that if she landed this exclusive interview, it would be a turning point in her career. She quickly walked to the elevator and pressed the call button. A soft ding sounded as the doors slid open. Elena stepped inside, and just as the doors were about to close, another man stepped in. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, polished leather shoes, and on his wrist was a luxurious watch that Elena estimated was worth a small fortune. She cast him a brief glance, instinctively assessing him. The type of man exuding confidence to the point of arrogance. Likely a successful businessman or a cold-hearted investor. The kind of man she had written about countless times before. The elevator began to ascend, but after only a few seconds, bang! A violent jolt shook the entire elevator. The lights flickered a few times, then went out completely. For a few moments, darkness engulfed them before the emergency lights switched on. Elena took a deep breath. What the hell just happened? She quickly pressed the emergency button, but there was no response. A deep, composed voice came from behind her. Looks like we're stuck. Elena spun around, staring at the man. He didn't seem panicked at all. In fact, he was leaning casually against the elevator wall with an almost unnerving calm, as if this situation didn't affect him in the slightest. That only made Elena feel even more irritated. She tried to stay calm and pressed the emergency call button once more. Still no signal. We might be stuck here for a while, Elena sighed, turning to look at the man beside her. You don't seem worried at all, do you? He raised an eyebrow, his sharp gray-blue eyes glancing at her, but he didn't reply immediately. After a few seconds, he simply shrugged. Worrying won't change anything. Elena arched an eyebrow. Are you always this emotionless? The man tilted his head slightly, a half smirk appearing on his lips. I'm just being realistic. Elena was starting to feel annoyed. Typical, she muttered. He raised an eyebrow. Typical? She crossed her arms and leaned against the elevator wall, not bothering to hide the sarcasm in her tone. You look exactly like the type, an arrogant CEO who always thinks he can control everything, even a broken elevator. The man was silent for a few seconds before letting out a low chuckle, one that carried a hint of amusement. Elena found it even more irritating. What's so funny? She demanded. He tilted his head slightly, looking at her with interest. You talk as if you know me. Elena shrugged. I've met enough businessmen to know. Is that so? Yes, Elena continued, locking eyes with him. So what do you do? And don't tell me you're a businessman. I could have guessed that already. The man's lips curled slightly, a flicker of intrigue in his gaze. And if I am? Elena lifted her chin. Then I'd say you're not great at handling situations beyond your control. He let out a small laugh. You might be surprised. Elena crossed her arms, feeling an inexplicable irritation at his unwavering composure. Chapter 2. Tension and an unexpected conversation. 40 minutes trapped. The elevator remained still. Elena stared at the control panel, pressing the emergency button again, only to be met with the same useless beeping. On the other side of the elevator, Adrian leaned against the wall, hands tucked into his pockets, as if completely unbothered by the situation. She glanced at him. How could someone remain so calm while being trapped in a confined space with no idea when they get out? Elena sighed, pulling out her phone. Still no signal. We might be stuck here for a while, she muttered, unable to hide her frustration. Adrian raised an eyebrow, his sharp gaze carrying a hint of amusement. You're not the patient type, are you? Elena crossed her arms and leaned against the opposite wall. I don't like having my time wasted. Is that so? Adrian tilted his head slightly, his tone slow and deliberate. I think the world moves too fast these days. Sometimes being forced to slow down isn't such a bad thing. Elena narrowed her eyes at him. You say that because you have too much free time? He let out a quiet chuckle, neither confirming nor denying it. A minute of silence passed. Elena decided to break it with a question. What do you do for a living? Adrian adjusted his cuff slightly before looking at her with a piercing gaze. Business. Too vague. Elena squinted. More specific? He shrugged. Finance, investments. But I doubt you'd be interested in that. She let out a small, challenging smile. Actually, I'm very interested. Adrian raised an eyebrow. Oh? She leaned back, her eyes gleaming slightly. I'm a journalist. For the first time since their conversation started, Adrian looked genuinely intrigued. A journalist? Yes, Elena nodded. I write about entrepreneurs, finance, high-stakes deals, and mysterious men who like to hide behind a perfect mask. Adrian chuckled softly, but there was something unreadable in his expression. And who exactly are you talking about? Elena met his gaze, a glint of challenge in her eyes. Adrian Sinclair. The atmosphere inside the elevator grew heavy for a brief moment. Elena noticed a flicker of something cold passing through Adrian's eyes, but almost instantly he smiled. A smile that was impossible to read. Sounds interesting. His voice was even. So, what's your plan for this article? Elena was direct. I want to investigate Sinclair Capital's acquisitions. They've been taking over European companies at an alarming rate, and yet no one really knows the person behind it all. Adrian didn't look surprised. On the contrary, he tilted his head slightly, watching her as if assessing whether she truly understood what she was talking about. And you think you can expose him? He asked, his tone teasing. Elena smiled. Not necessarily expose. I just want to know who he is and why he always hides. Adrian leaned his head back against the elevator wall, a glint of amusement in his gaze. So why not interview him directly? Elena shrugged. If he was willing to speak to the press, I wouldn't have to be here. Adrian nodded slowly, as if contemplating something. Then, what's your real motivation? Elena frowned. What do you mean? He stared at her. Why do you care about this? Is it because you genuinely want to uncover the truth? Or are you just chasing a major scandal to boost your career? Elena stiffened for a moment. His question was sharper than she expected. She pressed her lips together, her gaze unwavering. I pursue journalism for the truth, not for fame. Adrian said nothing for a long moment. He just watched her, deeply, as if trying to determine whether she was telling the truth. Then he smiled lightly. Good answer. Elena felt irritation prick at her. I don't need your approval. He chuckled. But you do want me to believe you? Her fist tightened slightly. She realized he was pushing her, testing her patience. Then what about you? Elena suddenly changed direction. Why did you choose finance? For money? For power? Or just because you like being in control? Adrian smirked, clearly entertained by her boldness. You think I'm the controlling type? Elena raised an eyebrow. Aren't you? Adrian was silent for a few seconds before his lips curved into a faint smile. Maybe. The pause between them stretched a little longer. Elena decided to be even more direct. If you had the chance to do something different with your life, would you? Adrian tilted his head, his expression becoming unreadable. Interesting question. But no, I don't regret anything I've done. Elena frowned. Not even if what you do destroys others. Adrian met her gaze, his voice unwavering. Business is a battlefield, Elena. The strong survive. The weak get swallowed. She stared at him. And you don't see anything wrong with that? Adrian leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees, his piercing gaze locked onto hers. I don't believe in right or wrong. I believe in results. A slight shiver ran down Elena's spine. She didn't know why, but it felt as if she had just stepped into a psychological game with a man she couldn't predict. Welcome to Soul Stories. You're now part of the Soul Stories family, where heartfelt tales touch the soul. Your support, follows, comments, and feedback fuels us to create meaningful stories filled with deep emotions. Each story is a small gift, bringing warmth and joy amid life's chaos. We may not please everyone, but your thoughts help us improve and reach more hearts. Subscribe to never miss a new story. Invite friends and family so our community can soon reach 10,000 members. Soul Stories. Stories that touch the soul. Chapter 3. The Rescue and an Unexpected Revelation. Elena had never felt such relief as when the elevator gave a faint shudder, signaling that the system had been restored. A voice crackled through the speaker. "We apologize for the inconvenience. The issue has been resolved. The elevator will resume operation shortly." She exhaled sharply, feeling as though she had just escaped a nightmare. Being trapped for 40 minutes with a stranger, no matter how dangerously attractive his presence or how captivating his voice, was not how she had planned to start her workday. Adrian, the man who had remained unnervingly composed the entire time, merely lifted his wrist to check the time, as if nothing that had happened was even remotely significant. "Finally," Elena muttered to herself, determined to put this incident behind her the moment she stepped out of the elevator. But what she didn't expect was the elevator doors wouldn't just lead her back to reality. They would push her straight into the biggest shock of her career. As soon as the elevator doors slid open, a group of hotel staff stood waiting outside. They weren't flustered. They weren't rushing. Instead, they stood in a perfect line, their expressions carrying an air of absolute respect. Elena blinked. She had never seen hotel staff behave this way. Until one of them spoke. "Mr. Sinclair, are you hurt? We sincerely apologize for this inconvenience." "Mr. Sinclair!" The world tilted beneath her feet. Elena turned her head, nearly frozen in place. The man who had spent the last 40 minutes trapped in the elevator with her, the man she had casually teased as some arrogant CEO, the man she had assumed was just another wealthy businessman, was Adrian Sinclair, the very man she had spent weeks investigating, the man the entire financial world was chasing after, the mastermind behind the corporate acquisitions that had sent shockwaves through Europe, and she had just openly mocked him to his face, a silence so heavy it stung. Elena couldn't speak. Her heart pounded in her chest as every missing piece of the puzzle fell into place. Adrian Sinclair, the elusive, powerful figure who had never granted a single interview, had been standing right in front of her the entire time, talking to her, smiling at her, watching her. Heat flooded her face as the weight of everything she had said came crashing down on her. She had mocked him. She had called him an arrogant CEO. She had tried to analyze him without realizing she was sitting across from the very man the world was dying to know. Adrian, fully aware of her realization, met her gaze with something unreadable in his expression. He didn't say anything right away. Instead, he smiled, a slow, deliberate, dangerously amused smile. Then he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice just enough for only her to hear. "I'm sure we'll be seeing each other again, Rossi." Elena couldn't believe what she had just heard. He called her by her last name. That meant he knew who she was. He knew she was a journalist. He knew she was looking for him, and he hadn't stopped their conversation in the elevator, simply because he wanted to see how she would react when she finally realized the truth. Elena's mouth fell slightly open, but before she could utter a single word, Adrian was already walking away. His steps were slow, deliberate, radiating the kind of confidence that came from knowing he was always in control. The hotel staff immediately followed after him, leaving Elena standing alone in the middle of the lobby, stunned, disoriented, unable to fully process what had just happened. She struggled to collect herself, but the whirlwind of thoughts in her mind refused to settle. She had just spent 40 minutes trapped in an elevator with the most powerful man she'd been investigating. She had just missed the biggest opportunity of her career, an exclusive face-to-face interview with Adrian Sinclair, without even realizing it. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the way he looked at her before he left. Not with anger, not with annoyance, but with amusement, as if he was waiting to see what she would do next. Chapter 4. The Encounter at the Gala. The Glow of the Elite. A few hours later, Elena Rossi stood before the grand doors of the Grand Venezia Ballroom, the venue for one of the most prestigious events of this year's business conference. She took a deep breath, adjusted the elegant black dress that hugged her curves, and stepped inside. The glow of crystal chandeliers cascaded down, illuminating the room in a dazzling display of opulence. Tailored suits, breathtaking gowns, and the shimmering golden hue of champagne flutes filled the hands of Europe's most powerful figures. Elena was an outsider in this world, but tonight she had a mission. She needed to learn more about Adrian Sinclair, the enigmatic man who had unexpectedly walked into her life in the most unimaginable way. Moving slowly through clusters of guests, she discreetly listened in on conversations, searching for anything useful. But then, she saw him, Adrian Sinclair, standing in the center of the room, surrounded by Europe's most powerful businessmen. That same commanding presence, cold, calculated, yet undeniably magnetic. His perfectly tailored black suit, the deep navy tie, the effortless composure. Yet none of that was what caught Elena's attention. It was his sheer presence. He didn't have to demand attention. He was the center of it. A shiver ran down Elena's spine as she watched him exchange a smile with an older businessman, shake hands with a distinguished gentleman from England, and engage in conversation with a French billionaire. Adrian Sinclair wasn't just a powerful CEO. He was a man who held the chess pieces that could shift Europe's financial landscape. And her? Just a few hours ago, she had been stuck in an elevator with him. Elena wasn't sure how to react, but before she could even think, he saw her. His gaze locked onto hers, and for a fleeting moment, the entire room seemed to fade into silence. No one else noticed. Just the two of them. Adrian didn't seem surprised to see her, as if he had expected her to be here. But what made Elena freeze wasn't the way he looked at her. It was the way he smiled, a slow, knowing, deliberate smile. A tense moment. Elena refused to be the one to look away. She lifted her chin, reminding herself that she was here for work, not to be intimidated by Adrian Sinclair. But just as she was about to turn, he started walking toward her, calm, confident, as if nothing in the world could faze him. Elena felt a strange tension coil inside her. She had spent weeks investigating him, gathering every fragment of information she could find, yet nothing had prepared her for facing him in person. Adrian stopped just a step away, his voice a deep, smooth melody against the background noise of the ballroom. "May I offer you a drink, Miss Journalist?" A shock to the system. Elena went rigid. She had expected Adrian to recognize her after their elevator encounter, but she hadn't expected him to approach her so openly. In the middle of a grand gala, no less. He wasn't afraid of being noticed. He wasn't trying to conceal his identity. He wanted her to know that he had recognized her. She looked into his eyes, recognizing the challenge lurking beneath their depths. He wanted to play this game, but Elena had no intention of being an easy opponent. She smiled, regaining her composure, and replied smoothly, "That depends on whether your drink is as intriguing as you are, Mr. Sinclair." Adrian raised an eyebrow, his eyes flashing with amusement. The game had just begun. Chapter 5, a psychological game. The beginning of a dangerous chess match. Elena sat in a quiet corner of the ballroom, a glass of crimson wine swirling in her hand, while Adrian sat across from her, completely at ease. The glittering world around them seemed to fade as the true battle of wits began. "I wouldn't have thought that a powerful CEO like Mr. Sinclair would have time to chat with an insignificant journalist like me." Elena tilted her head, her tone laced with playful mockery. Adrian took a slow sip of his wine, his gaze never leaving her. "I always make time for interesting things, Elena." The way he said her name, no longer Miss Journalist or Rossi, but Elena, made her pause for a fraction of a second. Not allowing herself to fall into his rhythm, she quickly shifted the conversation. "You turned Sinclair Holdings into a financial empire," she said, her voice measured. "But I can't help but wonder, How many people were discarded along the way? Her sharp eyes gleamed with the unrelenting curiosity of a journalist unafraid to dig for the truth. Adrian chuckled softly. You make it sound like I'm some ruthless tyrant who refuses to accept competition. He leaned in slightly, his voice a low murmur. Elena, if you believe the financial world can function without difficult decisions, then you're far more naive than I thought. A game of words. Elena didn't back down. So do these difficult decisions include acquiring and dismantling smaller companies for profit? Adrian set his glass down, his gaze turning sharper. I don't destroy companies. I restructure them, he stated smoothly. If the previous owners can't keep up with change, that's their failure, not mine. Elena let out a dry, knowing laugh. So you're saying you're not the villain, just the best player in the game? Precisely, he replied without hesitation. But you know what's more interesting, Elena? She folded her arms, tilting her head. What? You're trying to paint me as ruthless, yet you can't help but be intrigued by me, whether you want to admit it or not. The unspoken attraction. Elena's heartbeat quickened, but she kept her face neutral. You're straying from the topic, Sinclair. Adrian simply smiled, his gaze piercing through her composed exterior. No, he murmured. I'm simply pointing out a truth. He leaned in slightly, the space between them shrinking to mere inches. I can see it in your eyes, he said smoothly, in the way you challenge me, but can't quite look away. Heat crept up Elena's skin, but she refused to let him get the upper hand. If you're trying to manipulate me with basic psychology, she countered, a smirk tugging at her lips, then you'll be sorely disappointed. Adrian let out a quiet chuckle. I don't need to manipulate you, Elena. You stepped into this game the moment you entered that elevator with me. A challenge extended. Elena set her glass down, meeting Adrian's gaze head-on. If this is a game, she said coolly, then what exactly do you expect me to do next? Adrian studied her for a long moment before answering, his voice slow and deliberate. I expect you to keep playing. She arched an eyebrow. And if I decide to walk away? Adrian shrugged, his eyes glinting with something dangerous yet amused. Then you'll miss out on uncovering a very interesting story, not just about me, but about yourself. The words were both a dare and an invitation. Elena could walk away now, keep her distance, and proceed with her article as planned. Or she could step further into this game, peeling back the layers of who Adrian Sinclair truly was. She held his gaze for a long moment before slowly lifting her glass, taking a sip of wine, and setting it back down. I never quit halfway. Adrian smiled. How fascinating. Chapter 6. An unexpected invitation. The party was nearing its end, but the lingering tension from Elena and Adrian's battle of wits remained. She couldn't deny that he was intelligent, dangerously charismatic, and, above all, an enigma she had yet to decipher. Elena was about to leave the terrace and return to her room when a deep voice resonated behind her. What do you think about a private cruise along the Grand Canal tomorrow? She turned around, coming face to face with Adrian Sinclair, the man who had spent the entire evening treating their conversation like an intricate psychological game. Elena narrowed her eyes. I thought you preferred boardrooms over luxury yachts. Adrian smirked. I prefer places where I can have complete control over my surroundings. She folded her arms, raising an eyebrow. So, is this an invitation or a trap? Adrian let out a soft chuckle, his gaze flickering with amusement. You can call it an opportunity, a chance to see my world from a different perspective, not through news articles, not through rumors. Elena held his gaze, trying to decipher his true motives. If I go, will you answer all of my questions? Adrian gave a slight shrug. I won't promise all of them, but I'll show you things no journalist has ever seen. She knew this wasn't just an ordinary invitation. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but also a significant risk. She could walk away with exclusive insights for her article, or she could find herself entangled in a game far more dangerous than she anticipated. So, Elena? Adrian's voice broke the silence. Do you dare? His last two words were a challenge. She hesitated for only a second, but when she spoke, there was no doubt in her voice. "Send me the time and location. I'll be there." A slow, knowing smile tugged at Adrian's lips, his eyes gleaming with unreadable intent. "Don't be late," he murmured before turning and walking away, leaving Elena standing there with a storm of thoughts swirling in her mind. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but she was ready to find out. Chapter 7. Tempest at Sea. Elena arrived at the dock precisely on time. The La Tempesta, a sleek, luxurious yacht, floated effortlessly on the deep blue waters of Venice, a masterpiece of wealth and power. She couldn't deny it. Adrian Sinclair knew how to make an impression, even in personal meetings. A crew member escorted her aboard, leading her to the deck where Adrian stood, looking entirely at ease, as if this was his personal kingdom. He wore a white dress shirt, unbuttoned just enough to reveal a hint of his collarbone, paired with black tailored trousers. A glass of red wine dangled between his fingers. This was a stark contrast to the cold, calculating CEO she had seen before. "Welcome, Rossi," Adrian greeted, his gaze sweeping over her with quiet appraisal. Elena folded her arms, doing her best not to let the extravagant setting distract her. "Do you always take journalists on yacht rides for interviews?" Adrian smirked. "Only the interesting ones." As the yacht pulled away from the dock, it drifted lazily through the canals before heading toward the Adriatic Sea. The sky was a clear blue, the water calm, creating the perfect atmosphere for what Elena knew would be a conversation far from simple, a glimpse into his world. After a light lunch and a sip of fine wine, Adrian led her to the yacht's bow, where gentle waves lapped against the hull. He remained silent for a moment before finally speaking. "Do you know why I agreed to meet you?" Elena tilted her head. "Because you want to control the narrative before I write it?" Adrian let out a soft chuckle. "Partly, but the real reason is that I want you to understand something." She gave him a skeptical look. "That you're not like the other ruthless CEOs?" He turned to her then, his gray-blue eyes sharp but holding something genuine beneath the surface. "I don't just care about making money, Elena. I want to change this industry. I want to eliminate those who abuse the system for personal gain. I want to build something meaningful." Elena frowned slightly. This was the first time she had heard someone like him talk about something other than power and profit. "Then why are there so many rumors about Sinclair Capital's questionable deals?" Adrian exhaled, leaning against the railing. "Because when you go against the ones in power, you become their target. And I'm no exception." Elena studied him carefully. Was he truly the ruthless businessman she had been investigating? Or was there more to him than what the world believed? The storm arrives. Before she could ask her next question, the sky began to darken. The wind picked up, and the once calm sea started to churn. Elena glanced up, concerned. "Looks like the weather's turning?" Adrian frowned, gesturing to the captain, but moments later, a voice crackled through the yacht's communication system. "Mr. Sinclair, a storm is moving in faster than expected. We may not make it back to shore in time." Elena's stomach twisted. "Please don't tell me we're getting stuck out here." Adrian's expression remained calm, but the flicker of tension in his eyes told her everything. "We have a safe room below deck. Don't worry, I've been through worse." But just as he spoke, a massive wave crashed against the yacht. Elena lost her balance, stumbling as the deck tilted beneath her feet. Before she could fall, Adrian's arms shot out, catching her securely. "Hold on to me." His voice was low but steady, grounding her amidst the chaos. He led her toward the lower deck as the storm unleashed its fury, the wind howling and the waves pounding mercilessly against the vessel. Trapped in the storm. Inside the safe room, the soft lighting cast a warm glow over the luxurious space, a stark contrast to the raging storm outside. Elena sank onto a plush leather seat, her pulse still racing from adrenaline. Adrian poured her a glass of wine, then sat across from her, completely composed. "Are you all right?" She took the glass, inhaling deeply before exhaling. "I expected an intriguing interview, not to be trapped at sea with one of the most powerful men in Europe." Adrian chuckled, sipping his wine. "In a way, this is a good thing. We now have the entire night to continue our conversation, without interruptions." Elena met his gaze, realizing that this was no longer just an interview. She was stepping into a world far beyond what she had anticipated, and the most dangerous part? She wasn't sure if she wanted to leave it. Chapter 8. Danger at Sea. The storm closes in. The wind howled outside, each gust rattling the yacht as towering waves crashed against its hull. The entire vessel trembled under the storm's relentless assault. Elena sat curled up in the safe room, gripping the armrest of her seat to steady herself. She had never experienced a storm at sea before, and the raw power of nature made her feel helpless in a way she never had before. Across from her, Adrian remained calm, but his sharp eyes betrayed a high level of vigilance. "Don't worry," he said in a steady tone. "This yacht is designed to withstand storms. We'll be fine." Elena swallowed hard, trying to believe him, but every time another massive wave slammed into the yacht, it felt as if they were one misstep away from being swallowed by the abyss. Then, bang! A sharp metallic crash echoed through the yacht. Both of them instantly locked eyes. "What was that?" Elena's pulse quickened. Adrian stood up and strode toward the door. "Something on deck must have taken damage." He glanced back at her. "Stay here. I'll check it out." Elena immediately sprang to her feet. "No, you can't go out there in this storm." Adrian hesitated for a fraction of a second, surprised by the urgency in her voice. "I've been through worse, Rossi. You don't have to worry." But she did worry. "You're the only one who can keep this yacht safe. If something happens to you, who's going to bring us back?" A moment of silence hung between them. Then Adrian smirked. "Are you worried about me?" Elena scowled. "I'm worried about both of our lives. Is that enough for you?" Another thunderous crash of waves interrupted them. The yacht tilted violently, and before Elena could react, she lost her balance. Her body lurched forward, but before she could hit the wall, Adrian was there. His arms wrapped around her, steady, unyielding, pulling her against his chest just in time. "Careful," he murmured, his voice lower now, more serious. "Confessions in the storm." For a few moments, neither of them moved. Elena could feel his warmth, the rhythmic rise and fall of his breath. For the first time since meeting him, he didn't feel like an enigma, a cold and calculating businessman. Right now, he was just a man, one protecting her. When Adrian finally set her back down, he knelt before her, his piercing gaze softened, but still as unreadable as ever. "Elena," he said slowly, "do you really think I'm heartless?" She opened her mouth to argue, ready to call him dangerous, ruthless. But then, she remembered. She remembered his words on the deck, about wanting to change the industry, about fighting against corruption. She remembered the way he held on to her hand when the storm worsened. She remembered the way he instinctively shielded her just moments ago. "I don't know," she admitted quietly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "I thought you were dangerous, but now, I'm not sure anymore." Adrian studied her carefully. Then he smiled, not his usual smirk, but something softer. "You're the first person to ever say that to me." Elena frowned. "Say what?" He leaned back against the chair, his gaze drifting to the ceiling. "That I'm not a monster. A man with many enemies." Elena's brows furrowed. "Who in the world thinks that about you?" Adrian inhaled deeply before turning back to her. "The ones who tried to destroy me, the ones who see me as a threat." Elena sat in silent contemplation, watching the flickering candlelight reflect in his stormy blue eyes. Between the chaos outside, between the roaring wind and crashing waves, she realized she was seeing something few people had ever seen. A side of Adrian, unmasked, vulnerable, yet still impossibly strong. "They don't understand you," she murmured almost unconsciously. Adrian let out a quiet chuckle. "And you do?" Elena had no answer, but as she gazed into his unwavering stare, she knew one thing for certain. She wanted to understand him more. Chapter 9. A Confession and the First Kiss. The morning after the storm. As the first rays of sunlight shimmered over the rippling waters, the yacht finally docked. The cool, damp air of Venice wrapped around Elena as she stepped onto the pier, feeling as though she had just emerged from a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. The storm last night had changed everything. Not just because they had faced nature's fury together, but because they had seen a different side of each other. Not as an elusive CEO and a relentless journalist, but simply as a man and a woman caught in something far greater than themselves. Adrian followed behind her, his posture as relaxed as ever, but his eyes sharp, as if he were watching her reaction carefully. "We need to talk," he said, his deep voice steady, not a demand, but a certainty that she felt the same. Elena swallowed hard. "I'm not sure that's a good idea." Adrian tilted his head, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Then why are you still standing here?" Her grip on her bag tightened. She turned away from his penetrating gaze. "I should head back to my hotel." "I'll take you." She spun back around. "You don't have to. I want to." There was no logical reason to refuse, or maybe she simply couldn't find a good enough reason to convince herself to say no. The unavoidable confession. The luxury car rolled smoothly through the cobblestone streets of Venice, the soft hum of the engine mingling with the rhythmic lapping of the water against the canals. Silence stretched between them. Then Adrian spoke. "Elena, I was drawn to you from the first moment I saw you." Elena froze. She turned to look at him, but Adrian kept his eyes on the road, his words confident, unwavering. "I don't know if you realize it," he continued, his tone calmer, warmer than usual, "but from the second you stepped into that elevator, I knew you were different." Elena opened her mouth to argue, but then she remembered the way Adrian had looked at her, the way he had smiled at her differently than he did at anyone else, the way he had protected her last night, even when he tried to pretend he didn't care. And worse than anything else, she had felt it too. "Adrian," her voice was barely above a whisper, "this isn't right." He finally turned to her, his deep blue eyes searching hers. "What part of it isn't right?" Elena bit her lip. "I came here to write an investigation, not to—" She hesitated, unable to finish the sentence. Adrian lifted an eyebrow. "Not to feel something?" She felt exposed. "Not to get caught up in you," she admitted, voice soft, as if saying it out loud would make it too real. A moment of no return. Adrian pulled the car over to a quiet canal, where the setting sun reflected off the water in breathtaking shades of gold and crimson. When he turned to her this time, he was no longer the enigmatic CEO, no longer the powerful strategist. He was just Adrian, the man who had held her during the storm, the man who had saved her from fears she wouldn't even admit to herself. "Elena," he said slowly, "I'm not the kind of man who gets caught up in things. I never have been. But you—" He paused as if searching for the right words. "You're the one thing I can't stop thinking about." Elena felt her heart plummet. She sucked in a breath, trying to steady herself. "Do you even know what you're saying, Adrian?" His gaze was unshaken. "I do." She was standing on the edge of something dangerous, irreversible. If she stepped forward, she might fall, but if she stepped back, she might regret it forever. And she couldn't step back. She didn't know who moved first. Maybe it was Adrian. Maybe it was her. But the next second, his lips were on hers. The first kiss. The kiss was everything. Slow but desperate. Intense but sweet. A fire and a whisper, all at once. It was as if Adrian had been waiting for this moment. As if he wanted to memorize her through every touch, every second. His fingers brushed against her cheek. A touch both tender and possessive. His thumb tracing small circles against her skin. Elena melted into him. She forgot that she had once tried to resist this pull. She forgot that she was a journalist, and he was the CEO she was supposed to investigate. All she knew was that her heart had never pounded this hard before. When they finally pulled away, Adrian didn't move back. His gaze stayed locked on her, memorizing every detail of her flushed face. "What now?" Elena whispered, her breath still uneven. Adrian smiled, a slow, promising smile. "Now, Elena Rossi, we see where this goes." Chapter 10. The Truth Unveiled. A Shattering Revelation. Elena sat in her hotel room, the night sky casting its glow over Venice, but she paid no attention to the city's breathtaking beauty beyond the window. Her eyes were locked on the laptop screen, Documents scattered across the table, each line of text screaming a truth she didn't want to believe. Sinclair Capital was entangled in a major financial scandal. The evidence she had gathered over the past few days, the whispers from small businesses crushed by acquisitions, the hidden reports disguising suspicious transactions, all pointed in one direction. And at the center of it all, Adrienne Sinclair. Her heart pounded wildly. As a journalist, she had to write this story. As a woman, she wished it weren't true. Elena inhaled deeply, recalling her conversations with Adrian. The way he spoke about changing the financial world, his disdain for those who manipulated the system, everything had seemed genuine. But the truth was, had she trusted the wrong man? The confrontation. She couldn't sit still any longer. Elena bolted out of her room, storming down the hotel corridor. She knew exactly where he was. The gala had ended, but a few guests still lingered near the bar. And in the far corner, Adrian. He sat alone, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his gaze distant. But when he spotted her approaching, he didn't look surprised. He already knew. Setting his glass down, he studied her for a long moment before speaking. "You found it, didn't you?" Elena stopped in her tracks. He knew. Adrian had known all along that she would find out, and he wasn't denying it. "So it's true?" Her voice wavered, not from anger, but from the crushing weight of betrayal. Adrian raised an eyebrow, his voice maddeningly calm. "That's a good question. But which truth do you want, Elena? The one you read in those documents, or the one I can tell you?" Her hands clenched into fists. "Then tell me, Adrian. Tell me I was wrong." He took a slow sip of his drink before answering. "It's not as simple as black and white." "Don't play mind games with me." Her voice snapped, raw with emotion. "What I found, it's not fake." A bitter smile curved on Adrian's lips. "No, it's not fake, but it's not the whole story either." Elena's chest tightened. "Then tell me the whole story." He exhaled, running a hand through his dark hair before finally speaking. "I've done things that many would call ruthless, but I've never betrayed my own principles." His gaze locked onto hers. "Do you really believe I'm just another greedy businessman out to destroy everything in my path?" She couldn't answer. "Do you believe I'm a monster, Elena?" His voice dropped lower, almost challenging. "If you do, then write your story." The words hit her like a punch to the chest. She had expected him to deny, to plead, to convince her otherwise. But instead, he accepted it, as if he had already made peace with this moment, as if he had nothing left to hide, as if she was the one who had to make the choice that changed everything. A heavy silence hung between them. Elena felt the weight of her entire world crushing down on her shoulders. Writing the article would mean exposing Adrian, destroying his career, his name, his empire. But not writing it would mean betraying herself, betraying everything she believed in. She had come to Venice to uncover a powerful man's secrets, but she never expected to become entangled in his web. And worst of all, she never expected to fall for the very man she was meant to destroy. Chapter 11. A desperate escape. Being watched. Elena stormed out of the bar, her thoughts a tangled mess. Her confrontation with Adrian hadn't given her the clarity she needed. Instead, it had thrown her into deeper turmoil. Returning to her hotel room, she planned to spend the night deciding what to do with the explosive information she had uncovered. But what she didn't know was, someone was watching her. A midnight threat. A knock at the door. Elena frowned. It was past midnight. Who would come at this hour? She cautiously approached, peeking through the peephole. No one. A sudden chill ran down her spine. She took a step back. Bang! The door burst open. 3 men in black stormed into the room, their expressions cold and deadly. "Elena Rossi," one of them spoke, his voice low and threatening. "You've been digging too deep into things that don't concern you." Elena's heart pounded as she instinctively backed away, but another man blocked her escape. "Who are you?" she demanded. The leader smirked. "Consider this your final warning." He stepped closer, a blade glinting in his hand. "Drop your article, or you won't get the chance to write another one. An unexpected savior. Elena's mind raced. She needed to do something. But before she could act, bang! A gunshot shattered the tension. The man closest to her staggered backward and collapsed. Elena's breath hitched. As the smoke cleared, Adrian stood in the doorway. A gun in hand, his expression cold, lethal. Drop your weapons. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried an undeniable weight of power. The two remaining men hesitated, but only for a second. One lunged at Adrian, but Adrian moved like a shadow. With a swift, brutal kick, he sent the attacker crashing onto the floor. The last man froze, his eyes burning with hatred. You can't protect her forever, Sinclair. Adrian smirked, his tone dangerously low. Try me. The man cursed before turning and fleeing into the night. No turning back. Silence fell over the room. Elena stood there, breathless, her heart still hammering in her chest. Adrian walked toward her, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. Are you all right? She stared at him, still in shock. How did you know I was in danger? He exhaled. I expected this to happen. Her stomach twisted. You knew someone would come after me? Not just you, Elena, he said grimly. They're after me too. The truth behind the scandal. They left the hotel immediately. Adrian took her to a secluded villa by the sea, ensuring they were safe from prying eyes. Elena sat in the grand living room, still shaken. You knew they would come for me, she repeated. Adrian nodded, his jaw tight. They want to silence anyone who gets too close. Elena clenched her fists. Then, the financial scandal I uncovered, is it true? A long pause, then Adrian finally spoke. Yes and no. She frowned. What does that mean? He leaned forward, his expression dark. There's a hidden force pulling the strings behind all of this, and I'm trying to bring them down. Elena froze. You're not the villain. Adrian chuckled softly, but there was no amusement in his eyes. I'm not a hero either, but I'm not the enemy you thought I was. Elena's head spun. She had thought she was chasing the truth, but the truth was far more dangerous than she had imagined. And now, she was no longer just an outsider. She had been dragged into the game. Chapter 12, Elena's Choice, a decision that changes everything. Elena sat in the grand seaside villa, her fingers hovering over the laptop keyboard. The evidence she had painstakingly gathered lay before her. One click, and the world would know everything. But the problem was, she wasn't sure what was right or wrong anymore. Adrian Sinclair wasn't the villain she had once thought. He wasn't manipulating the market for personal gain. He was exposing a far greater power lurking in the shadows. If she published her article as planned, she wouldn't be uncovering the truth. She would be playing into the hands of the real enemy. But if she chose Adrian's side, she was no longer a neutral journalist. She was no longer just an observer. She was part of the fight. Her hand trembled as she hovered over the publish button. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. What are you going to do? Adrian's voice broke the silence. Deep, steady, unshaken. She didn't turn to face him. She only whispered, I don't know. She felt him step closer, his presence like a silent force behind her. Then his piercing blue eyes flicked toward the screen. If you want to publish it, he said, voice calm, I won't stop you. She let out a soft, breathy laugh, but there was something painful beneath it. Do you really think I will? Adrian didn't answer immediately. Then quietly, no. Elena finally turned around, looking up at him. Why not? He leaned down slightly, his gaze unwavering, filled with something unshakable. Because you're not just a journalist, Elena. You're someone who seeks the truth, and the truth is never simple. Her heart stumbled in her chest. The walls she had spent years building, the barriers that had kept her from feeling too much, caring too much. They were crumbling. She couldn't pretend anymore. Adrian wasn't just a source for her story. He wasn't just another powerful man in her investigation. He was the man she trusted. And worse than that, she loved him. The truth must be exposed. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, then slowly typed out a message on the screen. I won't publish the article. Instead, I want to expose the real players behind this." Then she clicked delete. Adrian watched her, a small, knowing smile touching his lips. "You just chose a dangerous path." Elena exhaled, but there was no hesitation left in her eyes. "If the truth needs to come out, then I'll stand beside you." Adrian didn't say anything. He simply looked at her, his gaze unreadable. Then, he held out his hand. Elena hesitated for only a moment before slowly placing her hand in his. It wasn't just a touch. It was a promise, a commitment, that they would face this together, that she wouldn't turn her back on him, that from this moment on, they were a team. Chapter 13. The final move. The last piece of the puzzle. Elena sat in her apartment, surrounded by stacks of classified documents. Before her was the evidence Adrian had given her. Secret financial transactions, shell corporations, and hidden records that all pointed to one name. Victor Callahan. "Victor Callahan," she murmured. She had heard of him before, a seasoned financial mogul, his influence spreading across the investment world like a many-armed octopus. He had once been Adrian's business partner, but according to these documents, he was the true mastermind behind the financial crisis that had tarnished Adrian's reputation. Her phone buzzed. "Adrian, did you find it?" His voice was calm but razor-sharp. Elena took a slow breath. "Victor Callahan." A pause. "I've suspected him for a long time," Adrian admitted, his voice controlled. "But now we need solid proof, something that will leave him with no way out." Elena sifted through the files. "I found the transactions. He's been funneling money through a network of shell companies to launder funds and manipulate the market. If we release this, there's no escape for him." Adrian was silent for a moment. "It won't be that easy. He has too many allies. We need a plan." The plan. It was risky but strategic. Elena would approach Callahan as a journalist, interested in writing a biography about him, making him believe she wanted to polish his public image. Adrian would secretly send the financial documents to regulatory authorities, not releasing them immediately, but using them as leverage to force Callahan into making a mistake. Everything would unfold at an elite financial summit in London, where Callahan was set to announce a billion-dollar deal. The endgame in London, the Savoy Hotel, London. The grand ballroom shimmered under crystal chandeliers. Europe's most powerful investors mingled over champagne, discussing multi-million-dollar deals. Elena stood at the bar wearing a deep crimson evening gown. She felt Adrian's gaze from across the room, but tonight, she had a mission. Then, a voice. "Miss Rossi, what a pleasure to finally meet you." She turned. Victor Callahan, a man in his 50s, his silver hair meticulously styled, his gray eyes sharp and calculating. She smiled professionally. "Mr. Callahan, I've been looking forward to this interview." Victor took a sip of his drink. "You're quite the rising star in journalism." She gave a polite laugh, masking the storm beneath her skin. The final checkmate. As the evening neared its peak, Adrian stepped onto the stage. The room fell silent. He took the microphone, his tone calm, powerful. "Tonight, I want to share something important with all of you." The crowd leaned in. His eyes scanned the room, then locked onto Victor Callahan. For years, the financial industry has been manipulated by a hidden network. Shell corporations, fraudulent transactions, market collapses carefully engineered for profit. Victor stiffened. His fingers tightened around his glass. "And tonight," Adrian continued, "we have the evidence to expose it all." He gestured. A massive LED screen lit up. Financial records, leaked emails, wire transfers between Callahan's offshore accounts. The entire room erupted in murmurs. Victor went pale. "What the hell are you doing, Sinclair?" he hissed, voice low and venomous. Adrian stepped down from the stage, walking straight toward him. "Doing the right thing, Callahan." Victor glanced around the room, searching for allies. But one by one, they turned their backs on him. Stocks plummeted in real time, shareholders pulling out within minutes. Then, the doors swung open. A team of financial regulators and law enforcement officers flooded in. "Victor Callahan, You're under arrest for financial fraud and market manipulation." One of the agents snapped handcuffs onto his wrists. Victor turned, eyes burning with rage. "You'll regret this, Sinclair." Adrian smirked. "Number I won't." The aftermath. Victor Callahan was arrested, facing multiple financial crime charges. Adrian's name was cleared, his company stronger than ever. Elena's explosive article about the financial conspiracy rocked the industry, making her a rising star in investigative journalism. Victory and a new beginning. That night, as Adrian and Elena walked out of the Savoy, she turned to him. "You won, Sinclair." Adrian looked at her, his blue eyes burning with something deeper. "No, Elena, we won." He reached for her hand, fingers interlacing with hers. "And now?" she asked. Adrian leaned in, his breath warm against her skin. "Now," he murmured, "I think I need a vacation. With you." Elena laughed softly, and for the first time she didn't resist, because for the first time they had found something worth fighting for together. Chapter 14. A Proposal at Sea. The Venetian sky was painted in shades of gold and crimson as the sun dipped beyond the horizon. Gentle waves lapped against the yacht's hull, creating a serene symphony between the ocean and the evening breeze. Elena leaned against the railing, letting the cool sea air brush against her skin. She closed her eyes, savoring the rare moment of peace. For the first time in a long time, she felt whole. Then, strong arms wrapped around her from behind. "What are you thinking about?" Adrian's deep, familiar voice murmured against her ear, carrying an unusual softness. Elena smiled, turning slightly to face him. He was dressed in a white button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up, his dark hair tousled by the wind. But his blue eyes, they held something new, something deeper. "Just enjoying this moment," she whispered, "enjoying being with you, without danger lurking in every shadow." Adrian smiled, but there was something in his gaze that sent her heart racing. He reached for her hand, his fingertips tracing delicate patterns against her skin. "There's something I've been meaning to do for a long time." Elena's breath hitched. Adrian let go of her hand. And then, to her absolute shock, he dropped to one knee. She gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Adrian!" He didn't speak right away. The wind carried a strand of her hair across her face, and Adrian gently tucked it behind her ear. His eyes reflected only her. "We met in the most unexpected way," he began, his voice steady, rich with emotion. "Back then, I thought you were a nuisance, and you thought I was an arrogant CEO." Elena laughed, though tears were already forming in her eyes. "I once believed that in this world no one could truly be trusted, but you proved me wrong. You stayed, even when I didn't deserve it. You fought for me, even when you had every reason to walk away." Adrian pulled out a small velvet box and flipped it open. Inside, a stunning blue diamond ring sparkled under the twilight sky, its color mirroring the depths of the ocean. "I used to think power, success, and control were all I needed. But now I know, the one thing I can't live without is you." He held her gaze, unwavering, certain. "Elena Rossi, will you marry me?" Elena froze, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. This wasn't just a proposal. This was a promise that they would move forward together, not just as lovers, but as partners, allies, and soulmates. She thought of everything they had been through. The elevator that changed their lives, the fierce battles they had fought against each other and alongside each other, the financial scandal that nearly tore them apart. She thought of the storm, the long nights alone, the way Adrian had always found his way back to her, and she knew she could never lose him. Tears spilling down her cheeks, Elena smiled and nodded. "Yes, Adrian. 1,000 times yes." Adrian laughed, a rare, unguarded sound of pure joy. He stood, pulling her into his arms before lifting her off the ground, spinning her around as she laughed through her tears. Then, with infinite care, he slid the ring onto her finger, his touch lingering as he gazed at her. Finally, he kissed her, deep, fierce, and endlessly tender. A kiss that sealed their past, their present, and their future. They stood there bathed in the glow of the moon and stars, lost in a world where there were no more secrets, no more battles, only love and the promise of forever. Chapter 15. A New Beginning. A Wedding in Venice. A few months later, Adrian and Elena stood on the shores of a small Venetian island where their love story had truly begun. Their wedding was intimate, attended only by their closest friends and family. Elena walked down the aisle, her white gown flowing like waves on the lagoon, her eyes glowing with happiness as they met Adrian's at the altar. "You're breathtaking," Adrian whispered as he took her hand. Elena smiled. "And I'm yours." The priest spoke, but they barely heard him, because their promises were already written in every look, every touch, every moment they had shared. And when Adrian leaned down to kiss her, they both knew. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Their future together. Elena continued her journalism, but now she used her voice to expose corruption and push for real change in the financial world. Adrian restructured his empire, transforming it into a transparent, ethical powerhouse, eliminating the forces that once sought to control the markets. Together, they launched a charitable foundation, helping those affected by corporate fraud and financial scandals. Ensuring justice was not just a word, but an action. And no matter how ruthless the business world became, they had each other. Love is more than passion. Sometimes love isn't just about attraction. It's about partnership, trust, and standing by each other, even in the hardest of times. And for Adrian and Elena, their greatest success was never in power or wealth, but in choosing each other every single day. Thank you for following this story. Let us know what you thought, and don't forget to subscribe for more emotional and powerful stories. Leave a comment, share this story with others. Stay tuned for the next one.